Top Wild West Outlaws' suspicious deaths exposed. What really happened to four legends of the frontier when the gun smoke cleared? Did they fall as the papers swore, or slip past the noose in the grave? Tonight we ride into missing bodies, swapped identities, and a coroner's ink that didn't always match the facts. You'll hear about a gentleman bandit who vanished, a folk hero shot in his own house, a pair of ghosts in Bolivia, and a gunman found under an oak with one haunting detail on his feet. Later in this video, we'll test old rumors with hard clues and close each case without guesswork. Stick around to discover which story the evidence finally backs and which death still won't stay buried. Black Bart, where did he go? What really happened to Black Bart after he walked out of San Quentin in 1888? Let's set the stage. Black Bart was not the kind of outlaw you picture from dime novels. He didn't spray bullets or brag in saloons. He dressed neat, used polite words, and robbed stagecoaches without firing a shot. He sometimes left short poems, signed Black Bart, the P08. That odd little joke, poet, made the papers laugh. It also made him famous from the gold fields to San Francisco. Keep listening, because later in this video we'll circle back to one small clue he left behind and how it points to where he may have gone. Before he was Black Bart, he was Charles E. Bowles, a Union Army veteran. He fought in the Civil War, got wounded, and went west like many men who wanted a fresh start. The West gave him hard work and dust. In the 1870s, Wells Fargo coaches carried gold and cash across lonely roads. Bowles tried prospecting, failed, and chose an easier risk: hold up the stage, grab the strongbox, and vanish into the brush. He picked spots with hills and cover. He used a shotgun, often unloaded, and a mask. His voice was calm. Drivers later said they were more spooked by his manners than by his gun. He robbed dozens of times in California, mostly in the Sierra foothills. He never hurt anyone. That helped his legend grow. Newspapers called him a gentleman bandit. Even some Wells Fargo men admitted he was unusual. But law and order had their own legends to keep. The company hired sharp detectives, and one, James Hume, made it a point of pride to catch him. Stick around to discover the tiny household detail that finally did Black Bart in. The inn began on a dusty grade near Sonora in 1883. The stage climbed Funk Hill, heavy with gold. Bart stepped out with his sack over his head and his shotgun at the ready. It worked until it didn't. The guard chased him. In the scramble, Bart dropped a handkerchief with a laundry mark. A laundry mark, not a bullet, not a boot track. The detectives ran that mark through dozens of laundries in San Francisco. One clerk remembered it. The trail led to a polite older man in a boarding house, Charles Bolton, an alias for Charles Bowles. When they searched his room, they found a mask, a belt, and more clues. He confessed to part of it, careful with his words, still keeping some pride. The court gave him 6 years in San Quentin. Prison changed him, but not in the way we see with hard cases. He did his time without trouble. He read. He kept his bed tight. He was over 50 when he went in, old for an outlaw even then. After 4 years and 2 months, for good behavior, he walked out the gate in January 1888, wearing a decent suit and carrying quiet eyes. Reporters rushed him. One asked if he would rob stages again. "No, gentlemen," he said. "I am through with crime." It sounded like a man signing off on a long, strange career. So why didn't the story end there? Because the trail goes cold in the most irritating way. A goodbye, a few hints, and then nothing certain. Right after his release, Black Bart stayed in San Francisco for a bit. He checked into the Nevada house on 2nd Street. He told the desk he worked in mining. He ate simple meals and took long walks. Wells Fargo still watched him. They worried that habit might call him back to the road. Then, around February, he checked out. He said he felt sick and tired and might head to Nevada. That was the last solid fact everyone agrees on. From here, the story splits, like wagon tracks in a wash after a storm. One story says he went east, back to family under his legal name, and died quietly. It's tidy, which makes people doubt it. Another claims he tried one more holdup that same year, near the old routes. A masked man stopped a coach. The voice sounded older. The style was similar, but the robber fled empty-handed, and the note he left was clumsy, like someone copying the real Bart. Even the spelling was off. Was it him, slipping, or a copycat chasing fame? The drivers weren't sure, and neither are we. There's also the theory that Wells Fargo leaned on him after release. Stay clean, keep moving, and don't test us. In the West, that kind of talk didn't need paperwork. A quiet threat can travel faster than a wanted poster. If he heard it, he may have taken a train ticket and kept going. A gentleman bandit can be polite enough to vanish. Let's pull on one loose thread: money. Bart never hauled off the kind of sums Butch and Sundance later chased. His takes were steady but not huge. He paid for rooms, decent clothes, and time in the city before prison. After release, he had no known trade, no young man's back for hard labor, and no partners. That points away from a long life on the run and toward a simple exit: a boarding house death under an alias, a grave with a wrong name, or a train east where he folded back into the crowd. Later in this video, when we look at Jesse James, you'll see how imposters muddy the water. With Bart, it's almost the opposite. The man himself preferred quiet, so the water stayed still. There's humor in the way he got caught, taken down by laundry, not lead. But there's also a lesson older men know well. In the end, the small habits tell the big story. Bart kept clean shirts. He kept his word choice neat. He kept his robberies short and his exit routes planned. That same tidy mind could also plan a clean retirement. No letters, no old friends, no trail. A man who never fired a shot might also never leave a footprint. Now a quick rehook. What about the poems? If anyone could not resist one last rhyme, it would be him. But after prison, no poem appears that scholars trust. The ones that pop up in later years read like copies. The meter is off. The bite is gone. Whoever wrote them wanted the name, not the craft. That silence feels like Bart's last wink. He stopped because he said he would. Another clue sits in his age. He was pushing 60 when he left prison. In the 1880s, that was old, especially for a man who had lived rough. The roads were unforgiving. Work was scarce for worn-out shoulders. An older outlaw had two choices: stage a noisy end or fade. Bart chose to fade. If you're thinking, but someone would have noticed him, remember how many veterans, miners, and drifters moved through the Western rail hubs. Men with gray beards and straight backs filled whole boarding houses. A polite man paying cash and minding his business was not worth a second look. So where did he go? The best answer fits his character. He likely left California soon after release, traveled under his legal name, or a new, dull alias, and died quietly, east of the Sierras, perhaps back near old family lines. No headline, no poem, just a man setting down his bag at last. It isn't flashy, but it matches the one steady truth about Black Bart. He wanted control. He controlled his robberies. He controlled his image. And in the end, he controlled his exit. Now let's close the loop we opened at the start. What really happened to Black Bart after 1888? He walked out a free man and chose silence. The mystery isn't a trick. It's his last act. He slipped into the same shadow he used on those mountain roads, and he never stepped back into the light. That answer may not shout, but it rings true. Up next, we move from a quiet fade to a loud question. Jesse James. Did he really die in 1882, or did he stage his own farewell? Jesse James. A staged farewell? What really happened in that quiet house in St. Joseph, Missouri, on April 3, 1882? Jesse James woke up like any other morning. He ate breakfast with his wife and children. Two young men sat with him, Charlie and Robert Ford, new recruits to his small gang. Jesse was careful. He lived by false names. He checked windows. He wore his pistols close. But that morning he noticed dust on a picture frame. He took off his gun belt to reach up and wipe it. In that small, ordinary moment, Robert Ford pulled a gun and shot him in the back of the head. The outlaw who had robbed trains and banks for years fell face first on a cheap rug. Hold that scene in your mind, because later in this video we'll test whether the man on that floor was really Jesse, or a decoy for a staged death. To see why people doubt, we need to see who Jesse was. He grew up in Missouri in a bitter border war. As a teen, he rode with Confederate guerrillas. He learned fast strikes, fast exits, and a cold face. After the Civil War, he and his brother Frank kept the fight going in a new way: robbery. They hit banks linked to Union men. They hit railroads that paid Pinkertons to chase them. Some folks called them rebels. Many more called them crooks. Both can be true. The Pinkertons threw bombs and kicked in doors. The James boys shot back. By the late 1870s, the gang was smaller, the friends thinner, and the state wanted Jesse gone. Enter Governor Thomas Crittenden. He made it known that reward money waited for anyone who would bring Jesse in. Dead or alive, as the posters said. The Fords took the bait. They were young, scared, and eager to trade one quick act for a full pardon. And so, in that rented house on Lafayette Street, they acted. A coroner came. A crowd came. Photos were taken of the dead man laid out for viewing. The body had Jesse's known scars. The beard matched. His wife, Zerelda, said it was him. Frank James surrendered months later, as if the chase had lost its point. If it was a trick, it fooled his own brother. So why do rumors last? 2 reasons. First, Americans love a great escape. Second, imposters saw a chance to live large by claiming a famous name. For decades, Jesse James showed up in small towns far from Missouri. He showed up in Texas, in Oklahoma, even as an old man in a rocker. Each story had just enough detail to hook listeners. A bullet scar here, a missing fingertip there, a deep knowledge of the gang's routes. If you're thinking, could all those people be wrong? Stick around to discover how science later weighed in. Let's look at the shooting itself. Some say the Fords staged a fake death to cash the reward while letting Jesse slip away. But the plan breaks apart when you push on it. Where do you find a look-alike with the same scars? How do you fool family, friends, and neighbors who had seen Jesse close? How do you keep Frank, who knew every mark on his brother's body, quiet for the rest of his life? And why would Jesse trust 2 green recruits with a scheme that handed them the keys to his future? The simpler story fits better. Greed met fear, and a traitor took his shot. Now about those scars. Jesse had a healed bullet wound in his chest and other marks from years of violence. Witnesses at the inquest checked them. The photos, which spread through newspapers, looked like the man in earlier portraits. Even small things matched, like the shape of his ears and jawline. Could a coroner, a wife, and a brother all be fooled on the same day? Possible. Maybe. Likely? Not at all. The Fords themselves did not get the warm welcome they expected. Robert Ford was branded the dirty little coward. He got his pardon, but not peace. He opened saloons. He posed in stage shows, reenacting the killing for paying crowds. It did not save him. In 1892, a man named Edward O'Kelly walked into Ford's place in Colorado and shot him dead. Charlie Ford took his own life earlier. If they were partners in a clean fake, it brought them nothing but grime and grief. The biggest blow to the staged death theory came long after. Years later, Jesse's body was moved to a cemetery in Kearney, Missouri. In the 1990s, scientists tested remains believed to be his. They compared DNA from the bones to living people in Jesse's family line on his mother's side. The result matched. In plain words, the body in the grave is the James family's son. Later in this video, when we get to Butch Cassidy, you'll see that paperwork can be messy, but here, the science lands with weight. What about the most famous imposter, Frank Dalton? In the late 1940s, Dalton claimed he was the real Jesse, now old but alive. He told stories with a showman's flair. Crowds loved him. A few locals believed him. He died in Texas in 1951. Years later, tests on remains linked to Dalton showed he was not Jesse James. His legend helped sell postcards, not truth. The same pattern repeats with other claimants. Big tales, short proof. There's also the money trail. Jesse lived off robberies. He shared the take with many men. He paid for safe houses and horses. He moved often. If he had faked his death, where was the hidden fund to support a long, quiet life? No bank ledgers show a secret cash well. No partner came forward with a stash map that led beyond rumor. Outlaws who live long usually have a steady business in the open or a steady friend with a deep pocket. Jesse had neither. One more point that older viewers know from life. People change habits when they plan a clean getaway. They write hidden letters. They arrange new names for the wife and kids. They leave clues they can use later to prove they're alive to the few who matter. We have none of that for Jesse. Zerelda did not get a secret note. Frank did not get a private sign. The family grieved like a family who lost a son and brother for real. Still, let's be fair to the myth. Why does it grip us? Because Jesse James sits at a crossroads in our story as a country, between farm boys and railroads, between war's end and peace's demands, between local pride and national law. A staged death would let both sides win. The law gets its headline, and the hero rides on. But the West rarely granted neat endings. It gave hard ones. So, was it really him in that house? Yes. The trail of facts is steady. The inquest, the family ID, the photos, Frank's surrender, and modern DNA tying the bones to Jesse's own blood. The imposters made noise. The evidence makes sense. This staged farewell is a strong campfire tale, not a true escape. Let's close the loop we opened. What really happened in that quiet house in 1882? A tired outlaw took off his guns to wipe a frame. A hungry young man took his chance. The shot ended a long chase. No switch, no decoy, just the harsh math of reward and risk. Butch Cassidy, back from Bolivia? What really happened to Butch Cassidy after the 1908 shootout in Bolivia? Picture a dusty Bolivian mining town called San Vicente. Two North American bandits checked into a small room. Locals whispered that these strangers had robbed a payroll mule train nearby. Soldiers and police closed in. Shots cracked in the dark. By morning, two bodies lay still. Papers said they were Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Case closed, right? Hold that thought, because later in this video we'll test the records, follow the money, and see why many folks still think Butch slipped home under a new name. First, who was Butch? Born Robert Leroy Parker in Utah, he learned ranch work as a boy. He worked hard, but cash was thin. As a teen, he fell in with a clever horseman named Mike Cassidy. The boy took the older man's name and a new nickname from time spent at a butcher shop. Butch Cassidy sounded friendly, almost funny. Butch was smart, loyal to friends, and, oddly, gentle to bystanders. Like Black Bart earlier, he liked a clean plan more than a hot gun. He formed the Wild Bunch, a loose crew who hit banks and trains from Wyoming to New Mexico. They used fresh horses, remote hideouts like Hole in the Wall, and long rides to stay free. By 1901, the heat was high. Pinkerton detectives tracked the gang. Wanted posters spread. Butch and his close partner, the Sundance Kid, sailed to South America with Sundance's companion, Etta Place. They tried ranching in Argentina for a bit, under new names. It didn't last. A bank job in Rio Gallegos drew attention. They drifted from farm work to robbery and back again, always a step ahead and always short of peace. If you're thinking, could they quit? Stick around to discover how one small payroll sealed their fate, or didn't. Now to the famous end. In November 1908, near a spot called Huaca, two bandits robbed a courier carrying cash for the Arameo Mining Company. Days later, in San Vicente, villagers reported strangers with a mule marked by the mining firm. A posse and soldiers surrounded a small house. Shots flew for hours. Close to midnight, the guns went quiet. In the morning, two bodies were found. One had a head wound that looked self-inflicted, as if he chose his end. The other lay near the door. The men were buried without great care. Notes were made. Some belongings were listed. The story spread. Butch and Sundance died far from home. So why do so many people doubt it? Start with the witnesses. They were brave, but not experts on faces. The bodies were damaged. The paperwork was thin. Names were guesses. The men had used aliases for years. No one took fingerprints. No family saw the bodies. Over time, stories changed in small but important ways. Some said the men spoke English. Others said they heard Spanish. Some said both men shot themselves. Others said soldiers did it. When facts shift, myths multiply. There's also the money trail. Butch liked tidy math. He did not drink heavy. He planned. He wanted enough cash to buy a quiet life. If he survived that night, the smart move was to vanish. Where would he go? Here is where family stories light up the map. Several of Butch's relatives later said he came home in secret years after 1908. They told of a man with kind eyes who slipped in at night, hugged his mother, shared a meal, and left before dawn. They said he worked odd ranch jobs under new names. No photos from those visits have rock-solid proof, but the tales are steady inside the family. Then there is the William T. Phillips Trail. In the 1920s, a man by that name lived in the Pacific Northwest. He wrote a manuscript titled Bandit Invincible that read like a man telling his own story with thin disguises. He had scars like Butch. He knew details that were hard to find in public papers then. Some researchers think Phillips was really Butch, older, careful, and still trying to shape the legend. Others say Phillips was a close friend of the gang who borrowed tales to sell a book. If you ask, which is it? That's the problem. Key records are missing, and the man stayed quiet when it counted. What about science? Years later, teams searched graves near San Vicente. They hoped DNA would end the debate. Bones were tested. The results were muddy. The samples were poor, The chain of custody not perfect, and the matches did not settle things once and for all. One test seemed to point away from a Cassidy match, but it didn't prove who the man was, only who he wasn't. That left room for more guesswork. Compare that to the Jesse James case we just covered, where DNA lined up neat. Here, it didn't. Let's weigh character. Butch wasn't a hothead. He kept his word to pals. He liked order. He once told a friend he wanted to quit crime if he could earn an honest living. In Argentina, he tried ranching. That tells us something. If he found a hole to slip through in Bolivia, he would likely choose a low, steady life, not more headlines. He might pick a dull name, a clean shave, and a far town with steady work. Older men know this truth. Peace beats glory when your knees start to ache. But we should be fair to the other side. The San Vicente scene fits a classic outlaw ending. A robbery, a chase, a shootout, a quiet nightfall, 2 graves. It is simple, and simple often wins. Officials on the ground believed they had buried the right men. Companies closed their files. The Pinkertons stopped the hunt. If the Outlaws had lived, you'd expect at least one clean sighting, bank records, a deed, a signed letter, some legal trouble under a traceable alias. We don't have that. We have smoke, not a fire. Here's a small rehook. What about Etta Place? Some say she left South America and disappeared into the States before 1908. If she had contact with Butch after the shootout, that would be a powerful clue. But her trail is as thin as his, maybe thinner. The silence around her adds mystery, but not proof. In the West, lots of people changed names and moved on without leaving papers. That was part of the lure. So, did Butch die in Bolivia or come home? The best answer divides the question. The official story says he died in 1908 at San Vicente, and many details support that. The family story says he survived and returned quietly for short visits, perhaps living out his days under another name. Both can't be true, but both fit parts of the record. Which one fits Butch the man? A careful, loyal planner might choose life in the shadows over a last blaze. A cornered outlaw in a small adobe room might also choose to end it on his own terms. 2 pictures. 1 legend. Let's close the loop we opened. What really happened after that 1908 shootout? Here's the sober take. 2 men died in San Vicente. It is likely, not certain, that one was Butch Cassidy. The holes in the files, the weak IDs, and the family stories leave a door open, just a crack. And sometimes a crack is all a good escape artist needs. Up next, we leave Bolivia's high air for the cottonwoods of Arizona. Johnny Ringo. Was it his own hand, or a secret killing tied to the Earp holiday circle? Stick around to see how a tree, a pistol, and a few missing hours turned one death into a long debate. Johnny Ringo, suicide or setup? What really happened to Johnny Ringo in the shade of that oak in July 1882? Start with the scene. A cowboy rides along Turkey Creek in Arizona's Chiricahua Mountains. He smells something wrong. He looks down a draw and sees a man sitting with his back to a tree, hat on the ground, a 6-gun near one hand, a hole in the right temple. That man is Johnny Ringo, the same outlaw who ran with the Cochise County Cowboys during the Earp troubles in Tombstone. Reports go out. A coroner's jury meets. And from that day to this, folks argue. Did he pull the trigger himself, or did someone he feared get there first? Stick around, because later in this part we'll look at one odd detail on his feet that tips the scale. Ringo did not start out famous. He was born in the Midwest, came west, and learned the hard life early. He rode for wages, drank heavy, and carried a fast temper. In Tombstone, he ran with men who didn't mind cutting corners. Curly Bill, the Clantons, the McClorys. He stood in the crowd the day before the OK Corral fight and later made dark threats against the Earps. He also had something people forget, books in his saddlebag. He quoted the Bible and poetry when sober. When drunk, he talked like a man who had lost more than money. That mix, hard words and soft learning, made him stand out. By the summer of 1882, the war in Tombstone had burned hot and cooled. The McClorys and Billy Clanton lay buried. Virgil Earp had been shot up. Morgan Earp lay dead from an ambush. Wyatt Earp had taken his vendetta ride and left Arizona. Doc Holliday drifted too. Ringo stayed near the border hills. He was not old, around 32, but he felt worn. Friends said he drank more and slept less. He talked of enemies. He also talked of being done. If you've known men who push past their limits, you know this tone. It's the sound of a rope rubbing thin. Now to the day itself. On July 14th, 1882, Ringo was found sitting with his back against a tree, head slumped. A bullet had entered his right temple and exited behind the left ear. His revolver had one chamber fired. His horse had run off days earlier. Oddest of all, his feet were not in boots. They were wrapped in strips of cloth, like someone had torn a shirt and wound it tight. Why? Because his boots, by some accounts, were still on the saddle of that runaway horse. Swollen feet don't slide into stiff leather. That small detail matters. A man walking barefoot in rocks burns with pain. That pain can break anyone's will. The coroner's jury looked at the body, the gun, the angle, and the scene. Their ruling was simple: suicide. They were men of the West. They had seen death up close. Accidents, fights, sickness. They knew the look of a staged shooting versus a self-inflicted one. They listed his name, the wound, and the likely cause. The county moved on. But legends never move on so fast. Here comes the counterstory. Some say he was murdered, not by a stranger, but by the very men he feared. The rumor spins two main versions. One pins it on Doc Holliday, the hot-tongued gambler with a quick draw and a cough. The other pins it on Wyatt Earp, the lawman who never forgot a grudge. In both tales, an old feud ends with a quiet shot in the trees and a body posed to look like a suicide. It's a strong story. It gives fans of the Earps a bold, secret victory. It gives foes a reason to spit. It also runs into trouble when you check the clock. Here's why. Paper trails exist. Holliday had court business in Colorado around those dates. Travel then was not quick. To be in Colorado one day and in the Chiricahuas the next would require a miracle horse and smooth rails. Wyatt Earp's steps are also easier to follow than some think. After the Vendetta ride, he kept moving and kept track of his name. That doesn't prove innocence with iron, but it makes a secret trip to the scene harder to place. Older men know this rule. Alibis built from records beat stories built from wishes. What about the position of the body? Some argue the gun lying near his hand proves a plant job. But guns don't always stay in a tight grip when a man falls. People seeing the scene after hours, or even a day, can nudge a weapon without knowing it. Coyotes and weather can move things too. Add in the fact that his hands were likely slick with sweat and dust, and it's easy to see how a revolver could slip. Let's talk motive. Why would Ringo take his own life? Start with drink. He was known to go on long sprees. Heavy whiskey widens dark thoughts. Add pain. Without boots, every step is a cut. Add fear. He had made enemies and felt hunted. Then add one more piece: loneliness. Many tough men in that land were really alone, even in a crowd. A man can ride straight for years and still hit a wall no one else can see. If you're thinking, but he was a fighter, remember this: gun skills don't guard the mind. Now for a small rehook, those cloth-wrapped feet. That image sticks. A proud gunman, famous for swagger and threats, reduced to rag shoes under a desert sun. If someone killed him, why strip his feet and tie rag wraps? Why not leave him with his boots and let the scene look neat? The boot problem makes more sense if Ringo was on foot for days, limping, baking, and slipping toward despair. That detail is not proof by itself, but it meshes with the coroner's simple call. Still, fair is fair. Could someone he feared have followed him, waited for the right moment, and fired from close range? Possible. Could that killer then have pressed the gun to the wound to mark powder on the skin? Possible. Could he have set the scene and ridden off clean? Also possible. But string together too many coulds, and a story leans on air. The West taught folks to prefer hard tracks to soft talk. There's also the pride angle. If Wyatt or Doc had won a secret duel with Ringo, would they have kept it silent for life? Maybe for a while. But men of that stripe tend to share their best hits, even if only with close friends. Over the years, claims popped up in second-hand tales, yet when checked against dates and places, they sag. A strong claim grows stronger under light. These wilt. Let's listen to the coroner one more time. Local juries then were not made of fools. They rode the same ground. They knew how a man's body falls from a self-shot at the temple. They knew the look of powder on skin and the smell of a close blast. Their verdict wasn't dressed up. It didn't need to be. Suicide. They wrote and went home to supper. So, what really happened to Johnny Ringo? The plain reading wins. A tired man, deep in drink, limped through those hills without his boots. He sat in the shade, set his back to a tree, and made a choice. That choice left a hole not just in his head, but in a story folks wanted to keep going. The setup theory is tempting because it lets old feuds burn forever. But life out here rarely ties bows on its endings. Most trails stop in a lonely place with no witness but the wind. Time to close the loop we opened. What really happened in that oak shade? Johnny Ringo ended Johnny Ringo. The signs, his missing boots, the cloth-wrapped feet, the single-fired chamber, the jury's call, line up like fence posts. The murder tale makes a lively campfire, but the quiet truth fits tighter.